Okay, so on the homework assignment 2.5 WSP, we want to start with number 3. The reason why is they're not, 1 through 4 are not that important, all right? So might as well just do 3 and 4. Now, when we evaluate, all you do is plug in. So could somebody just read me on the instructions what the value of y, z, and x are? But before you read it to me, let me just copy it first. Exactly the way it is, but with blank spots on the y, the z, and the x. Okay, so what is y? So that's really, instead of negative 3 times y, it's going to be negative 3 times 3 because 3 is y. How about the z value? Negative 4, thank you. How about the x value? Negative 1. So inside the absolute value, I'm going to do negative 3 times 3, which is negative 9. And then negative 9 plus negative 4, that's still inside the absolute value. So what's negative 9 plus negative 4? Negative 13. So you have the absolute value of negative 13, and then you have plus 1, because the minus negative changes the plus positive. So when you think about it, the absolute value of negative 13, that is 13, plus 1, that is 14 total. That's your answer for number 3. Let's try number 4. First thing to do on number 4 is to rewrite everything, but leave some blank spots instead of z, x, and y. So the z value is what?
Negative 4.
Negative 4. The x value is what?
Negative 1.
Negative 1. The y value is what?
3.
3. So notice that I rewrote everything. I left the blank spots for z, x, and y. And then we're going to work on the inside of the absolute value. So the minus negative changes to plus positive. Inside of the absolute value, negative 4 plus 1, that is negative 3. So that's still inside the absolute value. There's still a times 3 out in the front. There's still a plus sign. And over here, we have 2 minus 3. What's 2 minus 3? That is negative 1. So we really have a negative 1 inside these absolute values over here. So then we're able to multiply it. Actually, before we multiply, we actually do the absolute value of negative 3. That's actually positive 3. Bring down the 3 in the front with the multiplication. And the absolute value of negative 1 is positive 1, so you really have plus 1. So when you're faced with multiplication and addition, you do multiplication first. It's going to be 9 plus 1. 9 plus 1 is 10. That's your final answer for number 4. So on number 5, we are solving on this section, solving. And in order to solve an absolute value equation, you need to set up your two situations, your positive situation and your negative situation. And of course, your positive situation is writing it exactly the way it is, 2z minus 9 equals 1. The only difference is that I no longer have the absolute value on these guys. Just write it without the absolute values. And on the negative situation, it's going to be the same exact equation, 2z minus 9. But instead of 1, it's going to be a negative 1. That's what you do on the negative situation. Now let's solve both. On the positive situation, let me zoom in on that so we could focus in on that. I am going to add 9 to get rid of the subtraction of 9. What you do to one side, you do to the other. You're going to have a 2z left over equaling 10. So you really have 2 times z. So to get rid of the multiplication of 2 in front of the z, you'd have to do the opposite, which is dividing by 2. And yes, your final answer is going to be 5. When you divide by 2 on both sides, you end up with z equals 5. That is one answer. That's half credit so far. You need to do the negative situation as well to get full credit. So on the negative situation, again, same process, add 9, but this time you have a negative 1 on the right side. So the equal sign, it's just going to come down. On the left side, you have a 2z left over. On the right side, the negative 1 plus 9. If you owe $1 and you have 9, you could pay them off. You'll still have $8 left over. So right here, what we have is a 2 times z, and you don't want the multiplication of 2 in front of z. You just want z by itself. So the way to get rid of the multiplication of 2 is to do the opposite, which is dividing by 2. And when you do to one side, you do to the other side to maintain the balance. Z equals 4. Ladies and gentlemen, those are our 2 answers for number 5. If I finished the quiz early or finished the homework and you have some extra time, you could always check your answer by taking the 5 and plugging it in. 2 times 5 is 10. 10 take away 9 is 1. The absolute value of 1 is 1. So this one definitely works. If you plug in 4, 2 times 4 is 8. 8 minus 9 is negative 1. And then the absolute value of negative 1 is positive 1 as well. So we're absolutely positive that z equals 5 and z equals 4. Both answers work. You need to state both answers to get full credit. So I know it's weird. They give us a number line right here, and all you have to do is plot your answers. Where's 5 at? Where's 4 at? Okay, well 5 is over here. Put a dot right there. 4 is right there. Number 6. Number 6, we need to set up the positive situation and the negative situation. The positive situation is writing it exactly the way it is. 3 minus 2r equals 7. And the negative situation is the same thing. 3 minus 2r, but you put a negative 7 instead of a positive 7. So you solve the positive situation. You first get rid of that 3 by subtracting 3. By the way, this question was very similar to the one we did on the class opener today. That 3 cancels. You have a negative 2r left over. Over here, the 7 take away 3 is 4. So after that, you want to get rid of the multiplication of negative 2 right in front of the r by doing the opposite, which is dividing by negative 2. That'll cancel out. What you do to one side, you do to the other side. So you're going to divide by negative 2 over here. You will have r left over equaling negative 2. And that's one answer. The other answer, we need to work on it just the same. Get rid of that 3 first by doing minus 3. What you do to one side, you do to the other. But this time on the right side, you have negative 7 minus 3. Negative 7 minus 3 is negative 10. So you have a negative 10 on this side. The equal sign comes down. And you also bring down the negative 2r, which is really negative 2 times r. So the way to get rid of the multiplication of negative 2 is to divide by negative 2. So you're dividing by negative 2 on the left side, and you're dividing by negative 2 on the right side. The negative 2 and the negative 2 cancel. You end up with the r equals positive 5 because a negative divided by a negative is a positive. And of course, you just need to graph those answers. So just put the dot at negative 2, put the dot at 5. And that's it. Number 7. Let's set up the positive and the negative situation. The positive situation is writing it exactly the way it is. I don't like t because it looks like a plus sign. Without the absolute value sticks. And the negative situation is the same thing. 3t plus 6, but instead of equals 9, it equals negative 9. Of course, you put a line between them so you don't confuse the two equations. On the left side, let's solve it by subtracting 6. You're going to end up with 3t equals 9 take away 6 is 3. So you need to get rid of the multiplication of t right in front, the multiplication of 3 right in front of the t. So you divide by 3, and t equals 1. So now it's time to solve the negative situation equation. We're going to subtract 6. You're going to have 3t equals negative 15. So you really have 3 times t equals negative 15. You're going to divide by 3, and t will equal negative 5. Again, if you have time, take your value of 1, plug it in. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 plus 6 is 9. The absolute value of 9 is 9, so 1 definitely works. When you plug in a negative 5 right there, 3 times negative 5 is negative 15. And negative 15 plus 6, if you owe $15 and have $6, you're still going to owe $9. But when you take the absolute value of negative 9, it also gives you 9. So both answers work. You need both to get full credit. Of course, plot your answers on the number line, positive 1 and negative 5. Number 8, set up your two situations. Again, the positive situation is writing it exactly the way it is without the absolute value, so it's exactly the same. The only difference on the negative situation is that you take your 9 and you put a negative on it, and there is, again, no absolute value symbols right there. So let's solve both. On the left side, we're going to get rid of the minus 5 by going plus 5. What you do to one side, you do to the other side. You will have 2g equaling 14. Final step would be to divide by 2. So g equals 7. And the other one, we're going to also add 5, but this time we're adding 5 to a negative 9, not a positive 9. So we end up with negative 4 over here on this side. The equal sign comes down, 2g comes down as well. So you really have 2 times g equals negative 4. So let's get rid of that multiplication of 2 by dividing by 2 and dividing by 2. So we get a final answer of g equals negative 2. So you have those two answers, just plot them down here, negative 2 and positive 7, and we are done. Let's move on to number 9. Now we finally get to write an equation. Not solve the equation, but write an equation. Right here they actually give you the answers. This answer is 1, this answer is 11. And they want you to write an equation when they give you those two answers of 1 and 11. So what could we do right here? We need to remember the notes that we had earlier. How do we set up an absolute value equation when they give us the two answers? You do
x minus midpoint equals distance from point.
x minus, and let me do this, midpoint equals the distance from the point to the midpoint. Okay, so once again, x minus midpoint. What is the midpoint?
6.
6. So if we go, let me see, 1, 2. This is all confusing. Yeah, it is 6. Okay, so 6 is the midpoint. What's the distance? 5.
Yes.
So if 6 is the midpoint, yeah, the distance is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have equals 5. And that's it. That's your equation that if you were to solve by setting up a positive and negative situation, it would give you the two answers 1 and 11. Let's jump to number 10. So I've cut and pasted straight from our notes. Absolute value, x minus the midpoint equals the distance from the point to the midpoint. So let's first find that midpoint. What's the midpoint from here and here? Negative 4. So the midpoint is negative 4, and the distance from here to here is 1 unit, 2 units, right? So let's set up our absolute value equation. The absolute value of x minus the midpoint, which we said is negative 4, equals the distance from negative 6 to negative 4. That's 2 units.
Thank you.
So you have to put the absolute value x minus, leave the blank spot, equals blank spot, and right here put the midpoint, which is negative 4. You need to put that negative, even though there's a minus sign, you need to put it there because a minus negative ends up changing to a plus positive. So the final answer, or the final equation, should look like x plus 4 equals 2. Let's try the next one, number 11. So the midpoint here is the value of what? Negative 3, that's the midpoint. And the distance from negative 7 all the way to negative 3 is 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so let's set it up. Absolute value of x minus midpoint, I'm leaving it blank, equals the distance from the point to the midpoint, I'm leaving it blank. So inside, the midpoint value is negative 3, and the distance from the point to the midpoint is 4. Let me do that in red. And that's it. The only other thing you could do is change your minus minus to plus plus. So the best looking equation is x plus 3 inside the absolute value equals 4. That's the best looking equation for number 11. Let's do the last one, number 12. Again, set this up. Absolute value of x minus your midpoint equals the distance from the point to the midpoint. So what is the midpoint here? 2 is the midpoint. And what's the distance? 1, 2, 3, 4 again. So the midpoint we said was 2, and the distance from the point to the midpoint is 4. That is your final absolute value equation that produces the two answers, negative 2 and positive 6. Every single question on the homework's explained. No excuse for you guys not to have it done.